The train left her in Bell Creek just before 4 in the afternoon, under a Kansas sky that looked bigger than the town deserved. There was one platform, one depot, a grain elevator at the far end of the tracks, and enough wind to make her regret the thin gloves she had bought in St. Louis. She had one suitcase, a canvas bag with her books in it, and a small black case that had belonged to her father. The man who had placed the advertisement was waiting beside a wagon across the road. She knew it was him because he was the only man standing still. He was tall, somewhere in his late 30s, with a brown coat that had been repaired twice at one elbow. He watched her cross the road, then looked at the suitcase, then at the black case. "You're Mrs. Hale?" "Yes." "Thomas Mercer." He took off his hat. She nodded. He put the hat back on and reached for her suitcase. That was nearly the whole introduction. The farm was 9 miles outside town. For the first 2 miles, Mercer said almost nothing. The wagon wheels found every rut in the road, and the wind came hard across the harvested fields. Then, as if he had decided silence might be less useful than honesty, he began explaining what she had been hired into. He kept chickens, not a backyard flock. Nearly 300 laying hens, most of them barred Plymouth Rocks and Rhode Island Reds, with 2 breeding pens he had spent years improving. The farm had done well once. Good enough that a grocer in Wichita had bought eggs from him every week during the spring and summer. Good enough that he had added a second hen house 4 years earlier. That had been before this fall. "Production's down," he said. "How far?" He glanced at her. "Near half." "For how long?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. "Any deaths?" 14. That made her look at him. "All at once?" "No." "Same age?" "Mostly hens, couple younger birds." "What did they look like before they died?" He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the reins. "Tired." She waited. "That's not much of an answer," he said. "It's an answer." He thought for another moment. "Wouldn't eat much. Some quit getting up on the roost. Combs went pale on a few. Feed man said it might be something in the grain, so I changed suppliers." "And?" "Nothing." "Anyone else look at them?" "A man from town who sells medicines. Said it could be a bowel sickness. Sold me powder for the water." "And?" "You can probably guess." She looked out over the fields again. The farm appeared beyond a line of cottonwoods a few minutes later. The house was white, square, and plain, with a porch running across the front. Behind it stood a red barn, 2 long chicken houses, several fenced runs, and a smaller building with a roof that leaned slightly to one side. Even from the wagon road she could hear the flock. Not loud. That was the first thing she noticed. 300 chickens should have made more noise. A man came out of the barn while Mercer was unloading her suitcase. He was in his 50s, broad through the shoulders, gray at the temples, and walked with the stiff right leg of someone who had spent too many years pretending an old injury did not bother him. "That her?" he asked. Mercer nodded. The man looked at her. "You're the bookkeeper?" "Among other things." He looked at the black case in her hand. "What's in there?" "Things that don't belong in the ledger." He considered that, then gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Caleb Dunn." "Anna Hale." Caleb lifted her suitcase before Mercer could. "Rooms through the kitchen." The room had a narrow bed, a washstand, a small dresser, and one window facing the chicken yard. Anna unpacked the way she always did. Clothes last. Useful things first. The black case went on the dresser. Inside were bandage cloth, scissors, a thermometer, a small magnifying glass, a notebook, 2 glass droppers, and several tools that had belonged to her father. Her father had never called himself an expert. He had simply kept animals his whole life and disliked losing one without understanding why. Anna had inherited the same dislike. She had grown up on a farm in Indiana where chickens scratched beneath apple trees, and her father believed that most animal problems announced themselves long before people bothered to listen. After she married, she left the farm. After her husband died, she came back to practical work because practical work had one advantage over grief. It usually gave you something to do with your hands. Mercer had hired her to keep accounts, cook when necessary, answer correspondence, and help manage the household. Nothing in the advertisement had mentioned sick chickens. Nothing in Anna's reply had mentioned that she knew much about them. That evening before supper, she went outside anyway. The first hen house held the younger flock. They looked reasonably bright. Some ran toward her expecting grain. Others scratched through the litter. The second house was different. The smell reached her before she entered. Not terrible, not the sharp ammonia burn of a badly kept building, just warm feathers, dry litter, dust, and the heavy stillness of too many birds spending too much time indoors. Caleb was collecting eggs at the far end. He looked up. "Mr. Mercer tell you to inspect the place?" "No." "That sounds like him." She moved slowly between the rows. Several hens watched her without getting up. One barred rock stood near the wall with her feathers puffed out. Anna crouched. The hen's comb was pale, not gray, not blue, just washed of color. Anna picked her up carefully. The bird was lighter than she expected. She checked around the eyes, opened the beak, ran a hand over the breastbone, then looked beneath the wings. Nothing obvious. "You lose many eggs from this house?" she asked. "Most of the drop is here." "How long do they stay inside?" "More now that it's cold." "When did the trouble start?" Caleb set another egg into the basket. "September, maybe." "That early?" "Wasn't much at first." What was first, he thought. Egg count slipped. Then? Birds got lazy. Then the pale combs? Some. Anna put the hen down. It walked 3 steps, stopped, and settled into the litter instead of joining the others. She looked up at the roosts. Heavy wooden bars ran across the back half of the house. They had been built from rough-cut lumber, thick and solid, with supporting braces underneath. "How old are those?" Caleb followed her eyes. "Roosts?" "Yes. Been there longer than I have." "Ever taken them out?" "For what?" "To clean underneath the joints." Caleb looked at her properly then. "Lady, we clean this house every week." "I can see that." He waited for an argument. She did not give him one. At breakfast the next morning, Mercer put a ledger beside her plate. "You'll find the egg accounts in the back. Feed purchases are separate." Anna opened it. The records were better than she expected. Mercer recorded daily egg counts, deaths, feed purchases, sales, and weather notes in small, careful handwriting. She spent most of the morning with the books. By noon, one thing was clear. The decline had not happened in a single break. It had been gradual. A few fewer eggs, then a few more. Then a sharper drop after the nights turned cold. Deaths had followed later. That afternoon she checked the feed. It smelled clean. She checked the water troughs. No slime. She looked at droppings beneath the roosts, expecting diarrhea or unusual color. Nothing consistent. She examined 6 of the weakest hens. No obvious respiratory signs, no discharge around the eyes, no heavy coughing, no pattern that made sense for a fast-moving infection. But all 6 had pale combs, and 4 had lost weight. At supper, Mercer asked, "Find anything wrong with my numbers?" "No." He waited. "That disappoints you?" "No." It looked like it did. "I was hoping the answer might be in the ledger." "And it isn't?" "Not yet." He nodded as though that was acceptable. Caleb was less patient. "If they're sick, he said. "Chickens die." "Sometimes. They especially die when you own them." Mercer looked into his coffee so Caleb would not see him smile. Anna said, "Do they sleep normally?" Caleb stopped chewing. "What do you mean? Do they settle on the roost? Mostly. You said some stop getting up there. The weak ones. Before they get weak or after? He frowned. I don't know. That night, Anna woke sometime after midnight. The wind had dropped. For the first time since arriving, the farm was completely still. She lay in bed looking at the dark window. Then she got up. She pulled on her coat, took the small oil lantern from the kitchen, and crossed the yard. The chickens made soft shifting sounds when she entered the second house. She kept the lantern low. Most of the birds were on the roost. A few slept on the floor. Anna stood without moving for nearly a minute. Nothing. Then she brought the light closer to one of the wooden supports. There. A speck. She leaned nearer. It moved. She put the lantern on the floor, opened her black case, and took out the magnifying glass. Along the seam where the roost met the wall was a line so thin she had missed it in daylight. Tiny dark points disappeared into the crack. She took her pocket knife and scraped gently along the joint. 3 came out, then 5, then more. Some were gray, some nearly black. Several were dark red. Anna stared at them. She checked the next support. The same. Then the underside of the oldest roost. More. The birds shifted above her. One hen lifted a foot and resettled as though uncomfortable. Anna looked at the pale combs around the house, then at the red specks disappearing back into the wood. By the time she returned to the kitchen, the clock read 20 minutes past 1. Mercer was sitting at the table. She stopped in the doorway. He had a cup of coffee in front of him. You always sit in the dark after midnight? Not always. What happened? You crossed the yard with a lantern. I didn't know I was being watched. You weren't. Your room is over mine. She set the lantern down. I think I know what's wrong with the hens. He became fully awake without visibly moving. What? Mites. He stared at her. I've checked those birds. So have I. There aren't mites on them. Not during the day. That changed his expression. She sat across from him. They're hiding in the roost cracks. A lot of them. They come out while the birds are sleeping. Mercer looked toward the dark kitchen window as though he could see the hen house through it. You're sure? I'm sure they're there. I'm not yet sure they explain all of it. What would they explain? The pale combs, the weight loss, birds refusing the roost, lower laying, weakness. The deaths? If the infestation is heavy enough? He was quiet. Then he asked, why didn't Caleb see them? Same reason you didn't. That answer won't improve his mood. I wasn't planning to give it to him that way. Caleb's mood the next morning was exactly as Mercer had predicted. Mites? Yes. I've worked chickens 31 years. I believe you. I know what mites look like. I believe that too. And you found them after 2 days? One night. He stared at her. Mercer leaned against the counter and wisely said nothing. Anna put a small glass jar on the table. Inside were 6 mites collected from the roost seam. Caleb bent closer. His face changed only slightly. Could be some. There are more. How many? I don't know. Then how do you know that's what's hurting the birds? I don't. Caleb straightened. That answer seemed to unsettle him more than certainty would have. Anna continued, but we can find out. She proposed using the smaller rear section of the second house. 24 of the weakest hens would be moved there. The old roosts would come out. Every joint and crack would be cleaned. The nesting material would be replaced. The birds would be checked individually. Fresh roost bars would be installed with fewer tight wooden seams. A dry dusting area would be added where the hens could work dust through their feathers. Then they would watch. Mercer asked, how long? A week should tell us something. And if nothing changes? Then I was wrong. Caleb folded his arms. You say that pretty easy. It's easier than pretending. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Mercer looked at Caleb. "Can we spare the lumber?" Caleb muttered something under his breath. "What was that?" Mercer asked. "I said we can spare the lumber." They started after breakfast. The first roost looked clean until Caleb pulled the end away from the wall. Then he stopped. The hidden side was alive, not covered, not black with insects. It was worse than that because it looked almost normal until you stared. Tiny bodies crowded the narrow seam. Caleb lowered the board. "Well," he said. Anna waited. He looked at her. "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You were going to." "No." He picked up the board. "That's worse." By noon, they had removed every roost in the trial section. The deeper they went, the more they found. Inside bolt holes, under braces, behind a warped strip of siding, places no broom reached, places no daylight reached. Caleb stopped questioning whether the mites were present. He still questioned whether they explained the whole problem. Anna preferred that. Skepticism was useful when it did not become pride. They worked until evening. The 24 hens went into the clean section just before dark. Anna marked the egg count in her notebook. 11. The next day, 10. The day after that, 12. Caleb looked at the number. "Your miracle's taking its time." "I didn't promise one." On the fourth morning, one of the hens that had been sleeping on the floor was on the new roost. Anna noticed it before breakfast. She said nothing. On the fifth day, 2 more were up there. On the sixth, a Rhode Island red that had barely touched feed the week before pushed between 2 other hens to reach the trough. Caleb saw that. "She's getting rude again." "Good sign." "Usually is." The egg count reached 16, then 18. By the end of the first week, the change was not dramatic enough for a stranger to see. But the 3 people who had been watching noticed everything. The hens moved more in the morning. They spent less time sitting with feathers puffed. Several combs were darker. Feed consumption rose. Egg production in the trial group climbed while the untouched flock remained low. On the 8th evening, Mercer stood in the clean section with Anna. A barred rock jumped from the floor to the roost. He watched it settle. "Could still be coincidence," he said. "Yes." He looked at her. "You really enjoy refusing to say you're right." "I enjoy being right. I just prefer evidence." He smiled then. It was the first time she had seen him do it without trying to hide it. The next morning, Caleb carried one of the old roost boards into the yard and split it lengthwise with a hatchet. The inner crack was packed with mites. He stood over it for a long time. Then he called Mercer, then Anna. Nobody needed to say much. They cleaned the rest of the second house, then the first. It took nearly 2 weeks. Every old roost was removed, inspected, scrubbed, replaced, or rebuilt. Old nesting material was burned away from the houses. Cracks were cleaned. Dusting areas were added. Anna checked the weakest birds every morning and wrote down their condition beside the egg count. At first, she kept the notebook herself. Then one morning, she found Caleb had already entered the numbers. He had written, "House 2, 78 eggs, 3 pale hens improving, no deaths." She read it twice. Caleb was behind her carrying a feed bucket. "You wrote in my book." "Your hands look busy." "Your handwriting is terrible." "Birds can't read." By the first week of December, no more hens had died. By the second, egg production had climbed enough that Mercer stopped staring at the daily total before breakfast. By Christmas, the flock was not back to its summer numbers, but winter had settled over Kansas and nobody expected it to be. The important thing was that the decline had stopped. The birds looked like chickens again instead of animals quietly disappearing while everyone watched. The medicine seller came by after New Year's. Mercer showed him the cleaned houses. The man listened to the explanation, looked at the new roosts and said mites usually lived on the birds. Anna was in the feed room when she heard Mercer answer. "These didn't." The man said there were several illnesses that could also reduce laying. Mercer said, I'm sure there are. The conversation ended soon after. Anna never asked what the man thought of her conclusions. She found that results were easier to live with than approval. January brought hard cold, the kind that froze water pans before noon and made the chickens complain whenever the door opened. Mercer had one breeding pen he watched more closely than the others. 6 Rhode Island red hens and a dark, broad rooster named Franklin. The hens came from a line he had been improving since his father owned the farm. One evening, he brought Anna the breeding ledger. I want to set eggs from pen 3 in February. She looked at the records. You nearly didn't. No. How many? 3 dozen if production holds. She turned the page. And if they hatch well? I have a buyer in Wichita asking for pullets. He paused. That order would matter. She understood what he meant. Not save the farm. People used words like save too easily, but it would matter. They chose the eggs carefully. Anna marked each one in pencil. Caleb built an extra brooder box without being asked. When the first chicks began breaking shell in March, all 3 of them pretended not to be waiting. Caleb found an excuse to pass through the room every 20 minutes. Mercer reorganized the same stack of invoices twice. Anna sat beside the incubating hens and listened. A small tapping came from inside one shell, then another. The first chick emerged just after noon, wet, exhausted, and deeply unimpressive. Caleb stared at it. That thing cost us half a winter? It's been alive 3 minutes, Anna said. Still. By evening, there were 9. By morning, 22. 31 hatched from the 36 eggs. Strong legs, clear eyes, good appetite. Mercer stood beside the brooder with his hands in his pockets. He said nothing for a while. Then, that's the best hatch I've had in 3 years. Caleb looked at Anna. Don't say it. I'm not saying anything. I know that face now. Spring changed the farm quickly. The yard turned green. The hens spent longer outside. Egg crates began leaving for town regularly again. Mercer filled the Wichita order. Then another. He hired a boy from a neighboring farm 3 mornings a week because Caleb could no longer do everything alone. Anna continued the accounts, but somewhere along the way the boundaries of her job became less clear. Mercer asked what she thought before ordering feed. Caleb asked her to look at a limping hen before deciding what to do. She kept breeding records. She reorganized the storage room. Nobody formally gave her authority. They simply stopped making decisions in certain parts of the farm without her. She did not notice when that became normal. One evening in late May, Anna came in from collecting the final egg count and found the small shed beside the second hen house open. It had once held broken tools, fence wire, empty feed sacks, and things that belonged nowhere else. For the past 2 weeks, Mercer and Caleb had been clearing it. She had assumed they needed the space. Now there was a small desk beneath the window. Her black case sat on one side. A shelf had been built above it. On the shelf were the breeding ledgers, her notebooks, 2 clean jars, a new box of pencils, and the magnifying glass she had left in the kitchen that morning. On the outside of the door, someone had nailed a plain wooden board. Poultry room, the letters were uneven. Caleb's work, almost certainly. Anna stood in the doorway. Mercer came around the corner carrying a coil of wire. He stopped when he saw her. You found it. I did. Caleb said the sign needs another coat. It needs better spelling. He looked at the sign. Spelling's correct. Then better lettering. That would hurt his feelings. I doubt Caleb has any. He keeps them somewhere private. She ran a hand across the edge of the desk. It was not new. Someone had sanded it. One drawer stuck halfway out. There was a chair beside it. Her chair, apparently. Mercer shifted the coil of wire from one hand to the other. Thought it might be easier than carrying everything back to the house. Yes. And the breeding records should probably stay near the flock. Yes. He waited. She realized he was waiting for something more. It's useful, she said. His mouth moved slightly. Good. Then he went back toward the barn. Anna remained in the doorway. Outside, one of the spring hens crossed the yard with 7 chicks behind her. The chicks moved in bursts, running hard for no reason, stopping just as suddenly, then running again because the world was new and apparently required investigation. Anna watched them disappear beneath the fence rail. She had spent almost 4 years learning not to expect much from places. After her husband died, she stopped arranging things as if they were permanent. Rooms stayed rooms. A bed was somewhere to sleep. A job lasted until it did not. A town was somewhere you happened to be until the train carried you somewhere else. It had seemed sensible. There was less pain in leaving a place you had never allowed yourself to belong to. But she looked at the little room again, at the shelf, the ledgers, the black case that had belonged to her father, the pencils someone had bought because hers were getting short. None of it was a declaration. That was what made it difficult to dismiss. Some changes did not arrive with promises. They accumulated. A number written into a notebook by someone who once refused to listen to you. A man asking what you thought before he ordered feed. A desk appearing beneath a window. A place being made for your things before anyone asked whether you intended to stay. Anna stepped inside. She opened the bottom drawer. It caught halfway, just as she knew it would. She pulled harder. The drawer came free with a scrape. There was enough room for her notebooks and more besides. She went back to the house and brought out the papers she had been keeping beside her bed. Then she brought the extra bottle of ink, then the small stack of letters from Indiana that she had never found a proper place for. By the time she finished, the sun had dropped behind the fields. Mercer was closing the first hen house. Caleb was calling the hired boy back because he had forgotten the water bucket again. The chickens made the low, restless sounds they made before settling for the night. Anna stood outside the poultry room with one hand on the door. The spring air smelled of grass, dust, feathers, and the faint sweetness of something blooming beyond the fence. She looked toward the house, then toward the flock. Winter would come again. She knew that. There would be frozen water pans and sick birds and bad hatches, and weeks when the numbers did not go the way anyone wanted. Knowing that no longer seemed like a reason to keep her suitcase half-packed. She turned down the lamp inside the room. Then before closing the door, she moved her father's black case from the edge of the desk to the shelf above it. Not where she could grab it quickly. Not where it could be carried away in a hurry, just where it belonged.